Hey guys! Tonight, we tiptoe into the dimly lit boudoir of history, where secrets wear perfume, and no one asks too many questions. The room is warm, the corsets are loosening, thank God, and the air smells faintly of lavender, and maybe poison. Hard to say, really. You hear the delicate clink of glass, a mysterious little bottle passed beneath a lace glove. It's just for sleep, they whisper. Sure it is. A lover leans in, breath like honey and questionable herbs, and suddenly your heart flutters. Is it passion? Is it fear? Or is that just nausea? Love in the Victorian era wasn't all roses and handwritten poems. Sometimes it was opium bonbons, suspicious perfumes. They called it courtship. We'd probably call it a true crime podcast. So as you lie back tonight, maybe clutching your chamomile tea just a little tighter, listen closely. That rustling sound could be the whisper of silk skirts or someone quietly losing consciousness in the corner. Either way, we're diving into the powdered, perfumed, and deeply paranoid heart of an era obsessed with love and terrified of what it might do to them. If you're vibing with this decadent disaster of a bedtime story, give it a like and hit subscribe. No poison involved, just one harmless little click. And if you're feeling brave, drop your local time and where you're listening from. Just imagine someone across the world drifting off to the same soft madness. Now, relax your shoulders, dim the lights, and slip into the shadows with me. Just maybe don't drink anything unlabeled. You trudge softly through the fog. London, 1842. It smells like rain, horse dung, and clove cigarettes. You're outside a townhouse with velvet curtains drawn tight and something rustling behind them. Tonight, someone is falling in love, or getting terribly, terribly ill. Inside, she waits. Her name is Eleanor, and she's dipped the edge of her fan in a potion sold discreetly behind the drapes of a Notting Hill apothecary. It's thick and golden, a love elixir said to melt the heart of any man who catches her scent. But it's also full of Spanish fly, a well-known irritant, not just the kind that inflames desire, but literally inflames you. We're talking itching, swelling, possible death. Cute, right? Historians still argue whether these so-called aphrodisiacs actually worked, or if the placebo effect did most of the heavy lifting. But that didn't stop lovers from trying. Desperately, feverishly, sometimes fatally. You cross the room in your imagination, stepping around a lace shawl crumpled like an abandoned secret. There's another bottle on the dresser, marked simply Madame Bellamy's Velvet Thirst. It claims to be a cordial of rose, honey, and wild orchid root, but your nose twitches. That's not rose, that's camphor. And you're pretty sure something just twitched in the bottle. The Victorians were experts in repression, but repression, like steam in a kettle, needs a valve. And the love potion? That was the perfect little release. Scientific enough to feel rational, magical enough to be thrilling. You peek into the gentleman's coat pocket. There's a handkerchief stained with rouge and a tin labeled Dr. Wickham's Gentleman's Elixir. It smells faintly of cinnamon and sulfur, supposed to stir the blood, more likely to stir the bowels. But never mind that. It's the illusion that counts. Because in a society where holding hands before engagement could cause scandal, the tiniest drop of potion turned the forbidden into the faintly permissible. A loophole wrapped in silk. A gentleman might claim he was enchanted, not responsible for his sudden affections, not entirely in control. A lady trembling and blushed with the elixir might justify a moment of impropriety as the result of an accidental dose. No one quite believed it. Everyone pretended to. And that's where it gets delicious. You lean against the bedpost, velvet drapes brushing your shoulder, and picture Eleanor's suitor. He's just arrived. He steps into the room, breath caught, eyes dilating. Is it her dress? Her flushed cheeks? Or is it the potion tucked into the folds of her collarbone? She laughs softly. He doesn't realize his drink has been stirred with the same tincture she wore at her throat. And as his head grows light and his words more reckless, she whispers something behind her gloved fingers. Outside, the fog thickens. It hugs the windows like a jealous ghost. The thing is, many of these so-called love potions weren't mixed with love in mind at all. They were control, liquefied. From the poorest servant girl to the wealthiest widow, everyone wanted power over someone, or over fate. You wander into the next house, less grand, but warm. There's a teenage girl crouched over a bowl, grinding something gritty. She's muttering to herself, using her grandmother's recipe. Nutmeg, dried rose, a drop of menstrual blood, supposed to bind the heart, more likely to bind the stomach. And yet, who are you to doubt her? You're just a shadow tonight, drifting through rooms where hearts are on fire and logic has gone missing. A newspaper clipping floats past you. Young man in Chelsea dies of mysterious tonic. The coroner lists complications, but doesn't mention the bottle found under the bed. It had a paper tag with faded script, "For the heart's freedom." Some historians insist love potions were never widely used, that they were niche, fringe, or mostly fictional. Others suggest they were common but hidden, like erotic postcards or forbidden books, tucked into the private spaces no one admitted existed. Truth probably lies somewhere in between. Suspiciously, softly, right where your thoughts start to blur into dreams. One final stop before you drift further. There's a widow standing before her mirror. Her dress is black lace. She dabs something behind her ears. It's thick, musky, almost animal. Derived from ambergris, yes, the waxy discharge from a whale's digestive tract. It's expensive, erotic, repulsive. She smiles. She's not grieving. She's hunting. Outside, the lamplight glows like gold behind smog. A carriage rolls past. The night deepens. Somewhere in the shadows, another bottle is being uncorked. And you? You're sinking into the plush hush of it all. The lies we tell for love. The potions we drink to believe them. You follow the soft rustle of petticoats down a narrow staircase, your hand gliding along wallpaper that's faded with time. And secrets. You've slipped into another house now, different from Eleanor's. Colder, quieter, but something clinks in the parlor. A love letter just dropped into a box, sealed with wax and perfume. And inside it, not just words. You kneel to peek inside the letterbox. Someone has sent a gift alongside their affections. A dried clove wrapped in lace. Seems sweet at first, right? But you know better. This is Victorian love, after all. Cloying, complicated, occasionally criminal. Love letters in this era were more than ink on paper. They were rituals, sacred performances, perfumed stationery, pressed violets, locks of hair, sometimes real, sometimes stolen. You find one on the mantel now, curled like a question mark and tied with blue ribbon. No name, just a whisper of scalp. You sit beside a modest fire and imagine a young man in Manchester opening that ribbon with trembling fingers. He tucks the hair under his pillow like a talisman. Victorians were obsessed with symbolism. A strand of hair wasn't just a souvenir. It was an unspoken promise, or a warning. Historians still argue whether these sentimental tokens were heartfelt or habitual, expected gestures from people taught to suppress true desire. But there's no denying the intimacy, the invasiveness, the odd comfort of carrying someone else's DNA long before science had a name for it. Then there's the weirder stuff. You tip open a little velvet box sitting on the writing desk. Inside, a tiny jar, pickled. You blink. Is that a finger bone? Nope. Just a preserved mouse heart, dyed red with beet juice and sealed in spirits. Victorian DIY at its finest? Some lovers sent these as declarations. My heart belongs to you, they'd say. Literally. You shift uncomfortably. Let's not forget the Victorian obsession with mourning, which leaked straight into romance. Because the boundaries were blurry, darling. Love, death, longing. They were neighbors in the same dusty corridor. You reach for another letter. It's sealed with black wax, ringed in gold. The words are careful, measured. The writer apologizes for her emotional overgrowth and includes a pressed lily, symbol of purity, but also funerals. She signs it, forever yours, even beyond. The Victorians were subtle about a lot of things, but not grief. Grief they adored. They wore it, ate it, wrote it into every poem, and they flirted with it too. To love someone was to prepare for their loss. To write about passion was to nod toward its eventual ruin. Morbid? Maybe. But also, kind of honest. You find a mourning ring in the drawer, jet black, carved with tiny initials. Inside the band, a scrap of woven hair. It belonged to a woman named Agnes, who died of melancholic disposition in 1857. Her fiancé still wore the ring 5 years later, maybe longer. Then you notice the bookshelf. Middle shelf behind the prayer book hides a small leather volume. No title. You pull it down. It's filled with love poems. Some beautiful, some painfully bad. And tucked between pages is something curious. A drawing? Charcoal on linen paper? A woman, nude, but for a veil. Hand on hip, staring straight at the viewer. This wasn't meant to be seen. You tilt your head. Who was she? A lover? A fantasy? Maybe both. Victorians didn't have Instagram thirst traps, but they had artistic flair. Some even sent miniature portraits painted on ivory. Others drew their lovers in silhouette. Just the outline, the barest hint of identity. A mystery you could keep in your waistcoat. Not everything was innocent, though. You find a letter written in code. The lines seem innocent at first. Weather, church, a sick aunt. But the capital letters spell out something naughty. You chuckle. Victorian dirty talk, brought to you by acrostics. Now you imagine two young lovers, one in a boarding school, the other in a parlor with a strict aunt eavesdropping nearby. They pass coded notes beneath a Bible. I pray for you nightly, he writes, which you now realize is not at all about prayer. A fringe fact for you. Some lovers exchanged Venetian letters, messages written in lemon juice or milk, invisible until warmed over a candle. Not exactly practical, but then, neither is love. You wander to the window now. The glass is cold. Outside, the night deepens. And in another room, across the street, a couple sits beside a phonograph. He's just handed her a paper cone filled with rose petals and salt. You frown. That's not a gift. That's a ward. See, some Victorians believed in love curses, spells to break affection rather than start it. Jilted lovers might slip powdered toadskin or dried rosehip into a pocket, hoping to sabotage a rival's happiness. Jealousy isn't new, just better accessorized. You lean back and feel the soft creak of the old floorboards beneath you. Behind a loose panel in the wall, you sense something hidden. You pry it open. Inside, a yellowed paper bundle tied with string. It contains nothing but letters. Hundreds. All from the same woman, addressed to a man who never replied. The handwriting grows more erratic. The last note is a single sentence. You said you would never forget me. The Victorian era produced oceans of love letters. Some sweet, some deranged, all desperate to bridge distance in a time when emotions had no emoji and silence could last for months. You trace your finger over the ink. It's faded, but you can still smell the lavender oil. Someone held this, cried over it, slept with it under their pillow, or maybe set it on fire and scattered the ashes in Hyde Park. As the hour grows late, the paper curls in the fireplace draft, the room dims. Somewhere a clock chimes. You feel the weight of unsent words, the strange power of pickled hearts and perfumed vows. And as you close the drawer, you wonder, what would you send if you could? A lock of hair? A pressed flower? Or something much, much stranger? You push open the door to a little shop on a rain-slicked street. The bell above you jingles with a tired sigh. Shelves line the walls, crowded with bottles shaped like teardrops and thimbles. Flasks sealed with wax and ribbon. The air is warm, thick with clove, wormwood, and just a hint of something metallic. This is the apothecary's secret shelf. The one hidden behind a curtain or tucked into a drawer labeled tonics. Nothing sold here is advertised. No chalkboard menu, no prices in the window. But if you ask the right way, maybe slip a little coin under the counter, you might walk out with something sweet and sticky, wrapped in oilcloth and secrecy. Victorian apothecaries were the pharmacists, the chemists, and occasionally the quiet conspirators of their time. They sold painkillers and birth control, salves and seduction, all without asking too many questions. And you're standing right in the middle of it. The woman behind the counter wears thick gloves. She's stirring something in a blue ceramic bowl, slowly, carefully. She doesn't look up. For love or revenge? She asks, voice like wool soaked in tea. You hesitate. She nods. It's often both. She reaches for a vial. Inside is a pearly liquid the color of moonlight. Mandrake and lavender, she murmurs. Some say it stirs the blood. Others say it drives men mad. She sets it down, and just beside it, you spot another label. Essence of Belladonna. Lovely name. Awful history. Belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, was once used by women to dilate their pupils, thought to make them look more attractive, more receptive. It also blurred vision, caused confusion, and sometimes hallucinations. In small doses, flirtation. In large ones, farewell kiss. Historians still argue whether these ingredients were really meant to spark love, or if they were just dangerous guesses, repeated out of desperation and tradition. But there's no denying the risks. One drop too many, and your prince becomes a corpse. You pick up a dusty bottle marked Bovista Extract. Sounds fancy. Turns out it's puffball fungus, used in some circles to soften the spirit. More likely, it just gave people a rash. But who's keeping score? Then there's Spanish fly again. Popular, infamous. Derived from blister beetles. Yes, actual insects. Dried, powdered, and slipped into drinks. Supposedly an aphrodisiac. In practice, it caused painful inflammation, internal bleeding, and more than a few unfortunate deaths. Still, people lined up for it like it was chocolate. You glance toward the back room. That's where the real secrets live. Past the pickled leeches and the cinnamon tinctures. Past the shelf labeled liver and spleen. In the corner is a cabinet, locked tight. Inside are the more complicated requests. A young man comes in. Nervous, gloved, polite. He asks for a restorative for the heart. The apothecary doesn't blink. She hands him a bottle with a rose etched into the glass. He doesn't notice the skull faintly stamped beneath it. You step closer and peer at the notes tucked into the counter cracks, scribbled in different hands, some desperate, some poetic. He won't look at me. I need something stronger. My husband's affections have wandered. Can I bring them back? She dreams of someone else. I need her to wake up to me. One slip of paper is stained. Maybe ink, maybe something darker. It simply says, whatever it takes. A mainstream historical fact for you now. The British pharmacopoeia of the 1860s officially listed ingredients like cantharides, Spanish fly, strychnine, opium, and morphine, acknowledging their use in tonic preparations. In short, the line between medicine and manipulation was very, very blurry. And it wasn't just the poor who dabbled. Aristocrats, debutantes, even housewives with extra shillings, they all wandered into shops like this, looking for answers in a bottle. Because love was terrifying. Marriage wasn't freedom. It was a gamble, a contract, often a trap. And sometimes, a tincture felt like the only weapon left. You open a small tin, marked White Lilac Blend. Inside are tiny sugar cubes, innocent looking. But you read the penciled note tucked underneath. Infused with poppy, clover root, and tears. Poetic, and quite possibly lethal. The apothecary finally looks at you. Her eyes are pale, unreadable. People think potions change others, she says softly. But more often, they just change the drinker, give them courage or madness. She hands you a bottle wrapped in ribbon. It smells faintly of vanilla and ash. This one's popular, she adds, especially among the lonely. You tilt it in your hand. The liquid shifts like honey. Thick, slow, mysterious. Drink it, and you may dream of someone who loves you, she says, or someone you wish would stop. That's the thing about love potions. They don't always go where you expect them to. They don't come with instructions or returns. And they don't guarantee anything but a story. One final oddity before you go. You pass a shelf labeled Quiet Charms. Among them, a sachet of dried nettle, a bundle of rosemary tied with red string, and a tiny glass jar containing what looks suspiciously like a human tooth. The tag reads, "For loyalty, best buried under bedpost." You don't ask questions. You just leave. The bell jingles again, quieter this time. Outside, the rain has stopped, but the world still smells damp and a little too alive. You carry the bottle in your coat pocket. Maybe you'll throw it away. Maybe you'll use it. Or maybe you'll keep it sealed forever, just in case. After all, there's something oddly comforting about believing that love might be bottled, stirred, or sweetened with a pinch of cinnamon and risk. And something terrifying, too. You duck beneath the iron awning of a tiny perfumery, just as a carriage splashes past. Inside, the shop is dim, lit by oil lamps that flicker with every gust. The air hits you like a wall, heavy with musk, mint, crushed petals, and something deeper, animal, earthy, faintly spoiled. This is where they came to be remembered, to be noticed, to be irresistible, or at least inoffensively intoxicating. You lean toward the bottles lining the shelves, each with a ribbon and handwritten label. Essence of Violet, Lilac Rain, Black Amber No. 7. But the ones tucked behind the velvet curtain, they tell a different story. Here we go. Ambergris, Civet, Musk. You blink. These are not flowers. These are things that come out of creatures. Ambergris is a waxy substance found in the intestines of sperm whales. Civet? A secretion from the scent glands of a cat-like animal. Musk? Taken from a deer's gland, close to where no deer would want you poking around. But the Victorians? They dabbed this stuff behind their ears like it was Chanel No. 5, because it worked. Not in a romantic way, but a primal one. These smells weren't nice. They were compelling, strange, animal. They lingered. They promised something unspeakable. Historians still argue whether this obsession was about allure or status. musk was expensive. Ambergris even more so. A person wearing it wasn't just seductive. They were wealthy enough to smell faintly of whale vomit on purpose. You pull down a bottle labeled Mercury Rose. It glints ominously. Mercury, believe it or not, was once a common ingredient in cosmetics and fragrances. It gave creams a pearly shimmer, made skin seem luminous in candlelight. It also caused tremors, tooth loss, and a uniquely glamorous kind of madness. You remember Eleanor, don't you? The woman in the first house with her velvet gown and secret potion. Her cheeks were flushed. That might have been arousal, or mercury poisoning. It's hard to say. You peek behind the counter where a tray of beauty pastes sits cooling. One of them is labeled Arsenical Complexion Balm. Yep, arsenic. Applied to the skin in small doses, it created a pale, ghostly glow, but it also flaked the flesh. Over time, users developed sores, organ damage, and a perfectly tragic beauty. And yet, women loved it. Why? Because death was fashionable. Beauty was sacrifice. Looking desirable, even if it hurt or killed, was seen as noble. Romantic even. You brush your fingers over a lace-edged fan resting beside a bottle of lavender water. A sweet counterpoint to all the animal musk. But even lavender wasn't always innocent. Some perfume recipes mixed it with camphor or turpentine, others with laudanum, a tincture of opium. Wear it long enough and your skin might sing. Or sting. A gentleman enters. He's young, twitchy, with a red mark where his collar has rubbed raw. He whispers to the shopkeeper, who nods and disappears into a back room. When she returns, she offers him something in a wax paper pouch, dried rose petals soaked in a solution of turpentine, cinnamon oil, and, apparently, bat's blood. He looks relieved. You, on the other hand, wonder what sort of evening he's planning. You follow him out in your imagination. He's going to meet someone, a woman who's dabbed orange blossom at her wrists and maybe swallowed just a drop of tincture laced with Spanish fly. She'll look flushed. He'll feel dizzy. Between the mercury and musk, their courtship will smell like a funeral parlor and feel like slow poisoning, and they will call it romance. Quirky detail. Some Victorian dandies took to dabbing their handkerchiefs with creosote. Yes, the oily stuff used to preserve wood. It masked body odor. It also made them smell like railway ties. But again, the goal wasn't just to smell good. It was to smell strongly. You lean over a dusty volume on the counter. A Gentleman's Guide to Courtship and Cologne. One page is dog-eared. It reads, "A man's scent must not whisper. It must enter a room before he does and linger after he is gone." Charming and vaguely threatening. You sniff one last bottle. Night Blooming Tuberose. Sweet. Floral. Innocent? Not quite. The tuberose flower was considered almost scandalous. Its smell was thought to cause hysteria in women. Some Victorian mothers forbade their daughters from walking near gardens where it bloomed. So naturally, the flower became a favorite for moonlit encounters and unspoken liaisons. And that's the scent clinging to the velvet sofa in the shop's corner. Tuberose and something smoky. You sink into the cushions and imagine all the bodies that leaned here before. Whispered promises, sleeves dusted with arsenic powder, gloves stained with cologne that cost more than a year's rent. It's easy to believe in this foggy, perfumed room that love can be bought. That desire comes in tinctures, tonics, and tiny vials sealed with wax. But nothing's ever that simple. Because for every swooning gaze, there's a rash. For every quickened pulse, a slowed breath. The very things Victorians used to attract also destroyed them. And as you breathe in, your lungs fill with lavender and laudanum, rose and rot. You let your eyes drift closed, and for a moment, You understand exactly why they did it, to be unforgettable. You drift through the wavy glass door of a modest townhouse, the kind with ivy curling like fingers around its windows. The parlor is quiet. A low fire pops, sending sparks like secrets up the chimney. There's the smell of cinnamon, crushed herbs, and a trace of something bitter, like wormwood and regret. This is not a doctor's house. Not really. But it isn't a witch's cottage either. It's something in between. The woman at the table wears her gray hair pinned in a severe coil, but her fingers are stained with something dark and sticky. She's grinding dried bark into powder. Her hands move slowly, reverently. You watch in silence. She doesn't notice you. Or maybe she does, and simply doesn't care. This is where the real brewing happens. Not in apothecaries or gentlemen's parlors, but behind the quiet confidence of women who've had enough of waiting for permission. The Victorians called them wise women, herb wives, sometimes cunning folk. Rarely were they called scientists, though many of them knew more about chemistry and anatomy than the average physician. They weren't always witches, but they were treated like ones when convenient, and they made things, some to help, some to hurt, and some, like the one simmering now in that little copper pot, to bend the will of another human heart. The woman adds a pinch of dried mugwort, whispers a phrase under her breath, and reaches for a bottle marked red vinegar. It splashes like blood into the mix. You step back instinctively. Love, she mutters, should be chased, not caught. But people always want to trap it. She's right. That's the whole problem, isn't it? In the Victorian era, women were expected to wait, to flutter, blush, and swoon, but some didn't want to wait anymore. So they brewed. You open a drawer nearby. Inside are folded slips of paper, each with a handwritten spell or recipe. One reads, "To compel affection, 3 drops rose oil, pinch of sugar beet ash, 1 shred of undergarment, unwashed. Whisper name 3 times, clockwise over flame charming, and just a little creepy." Another page, worn at the corners, reads, "To avoid unwanted marriage, brew wild yarrow with thistle, add ground oak bark and salt. Drink on the full moon, then weep into a basin. Bury the water near the front step." Historians still argue whether these spells were sincere attempts or ritualized expressions of frustration. Was the girl crying into the basin trying to bend fate, or simply claiming any kind of control? You imagine one of them now. A girl of 17, promised to a man she's never met. Her father says the match is excellent. The man smells like ink and mothballs. She slips out at night, barefoot in the garden, cradling a tea made of fennel and valerian, supposed to make her less appealing. She hopes he'll change his mind. Victorian girls weren't taught how to say no, but they were taught how to pretend they were too delicate, too emotional, too sick. And sometimes that was enough. One fringe tidbit: some women drank mixtures of lead and vinegar, not just to lighten their skin, but to make themselves look sickly, fragile, a little deathly. It was a performance of refusal in a world that didn't take direct answers. You open a small wooden box next. Inside is a waxed envelope. It smells of old lavender and something sour. You unfold a piece of parchment for breaking the bond. 1 clove of garlic, 3 black feathers, a thorn from the bride's bouquet. Burn at sunrise with the words, "He forgets." Simple, brutal, final. There's a bitter undercurrent to all of this. Because when love is something arranged, something required, any resistance becomes an act of rebellion. You hear a creak. Another woman has entered the room. Young, eyes darting, hands twisting the hem of her skirt. She doesn't speak. The older woman nods. They don't need words. She's here for something. not a love potion. You can tell by the way her mouth is set. She wants a solution, a way out. The older woman takes a different bottle this time. The liquid inside is dark and sluggish. It doesn't smell like flowers. It smells like wet iron and roots. You don't ask what it is. You already know, because love potions weren't always about desire. Sometimes they were about survival, a way to make a husband sleep more soundly, to delay a child, to end one, all under the cover of women's medicine. And sometimes the line between medicine and murder blurred until no one was quite sure where it had been to begin with. You shift uncomfortably. The fire pops again. The copper pot bubbles softly. Outside, a wind picks up, rustling the ivy like a restless whisper. You look at the shelf one last time. Jars of dried herbs, bottles of cloudy liquid, a bundle of nettles tied with red thread, and tucked into the corner, nearly hidden, a necklace made of knotted twine and tiny bones. A charm, or a warning. The older woman finally speaks again. "They want to believe it's magic," she says, not looking up. "But it's just desperation mostly." You believe her. Because here, in the shadows, in the scent of ash and dried marjoram, you realize something important. These women weren't wicked. They were tired. Tired of waiting. Tired of being chosen or dismissed. So they chose themselves, even if it meant mixing wildflowers with poison and calling it hope. You let the thoughts settle like dust on your shoulders. And when you leave the house, you walk slower, as though every flower in the hedgerow might be part of something bigger, something older, something whispered and wild. The night deepens around you as you step softly into a cluttered kitchen, lit only by the glow of a dying hearth. Here, the walls are lined with hanging bunches of herbs, dried hemlock, rosemary, yarrow, foxglove, and in the center of the table rests a decanter filled with something red and thick as syrup. It's unlabeled. Naturally. You approach it, noticing the sediment swirling at the bottom, like tiny secrets. The glass smells faintly of vinegar, citrus peel, and maybe just a touch of regret. Or blood. In the Victorian age, it was hard to tell the difference. This is Venus powder. Or at least, that's what they called it in whispers. Sold by traveling vendors and hush-hush midwives, this wasn't your innocent sprinkle of sugar and spice. It was an aphrodisiac, a stimulant, a warning. One version, made from powdered cantharides, remember Spanish fly, was known to cause intense burning sensations, and if you're lucky, some physical arousal. If you're unlucky, kidney failure, internal bleeding, death. But in a time when arranged marriages were loveless and consent was optional, some women still bought it, either to make their husbands desire them again, or to distract them from someone else. Then there was widow's wine. You find a bottle of it in a low cabinet, tucked behind a bag of clove buds. It's deep purple, almost black, with a cork sealed in wax. Some called it a restorative cordial. Others called it husband's last drink. The ingredients varied: laudanum, belladonna, fermented poppy root, but the effect was always the same: sedation, detachment, and in high enough doses, silence. You trace the worn label with your finger. The ink has run, but you can just make out the slogan, "For troubled nights and tired hearts." You have to admire the elegance of it. Some historians insist potions like this were more legend than reality, that the danger was exaggerated by moralists looking to demonize desperate women. Others argue that the very idea of these substances was power enough, rumors spreading like wildfire through drawing rooms and servant quarters alike. You hear a giggle from the next room, light and nervous. Two women sit near a fireplace, passing a cup between them. The tea inside is dark and cloudy. One of them winces after a sip, Too much root, she says. The other shrugs. Too little time. They're not talking about flirting or even love. They're talking about escape. Because Venus powder wasn't just used to inspire desire. It was used to manipulate, to distract, to poison slowly and sweetly. And widow's wine? Well, the name speaks for itself. It wasn't a love potion. It was a reset button. You find a notebook on the table, leather-bound, pages curling at the edges. Inside, handwritten instructions, elixir of suggestion, crushed nutmeg, mint steeped overnight, drop of blood from the left hand, must be drunk willingly to bind the spirit. And beneath it, another recipe, scratched into the margin, to make one sleep deeply and forget. You bark. Burnt honey. 1 almond blanched and crushed. Serve in red wine, never white. You look up and see the younger woman pouring just such a drink. She stirs slowly, deliberately. He's never gentle, she mutters, but he sleeps soundly when I sing. A chill slips down your spine. Not all who brewed these potions were wives, of course. Some were mistresses. Others were housemaids with access to the wine cellar. A few were daughters promised to men twice their age. And a rare few were lovers of other women trying to mask their preference behind socially acceptable marriages and very quiet resistance. You lift the lid of a carved wooden box. Inside are trinkets, a miniature key, a swatch of linen stained with wax, a pressed violet, and a small vial filled with what looks like crushed pearls. You uncork it. The scent is oddly pleasant. Almond, orange blossom, and vinegar. A popular base for perfumes and for cyanide. Fringe fact, many early cosmetics and sweet-smelling potions were laced with bitter almonds. The compound that gives almonds their aroma is chemically related to cyanide, not enough to kill in small doses, but if someone were really determined. The fire crackles again, and you catch your reflection in the tea kettle. You look a little different now. Tired, maybe, or just thoughtful. Because here's the truth. Love potions in the Victorian imagination were never about just love. They were about control, the illusion that you could make someone love you, or fear you, or leave you alone. And while the church preached patience, and doctors prescribed marriage, and fathers arranged futures over brandy in the study, women found their own forms of power, liquid, bitter, and hidden in the folds of lace-trimmed handkerchiefs. You step outside now. The sky is the color of faded parchment, and a raven watches from the chimney. Somewhere, a man wakes with a sore throat and a headache, unsure why he can't remember anything past his second glass of port. The woman beside him lies still, eyes open, listening to his breath. She's already decided what to do next. The fog thickens as you cross a narrow footbridge over a stream that gurgles like it knows too much. You step into the cobbled square, where a small crowd gathers outside the courthouse. There's chatter in the air, low, sharp, and giddy. You're just in time for a scandal. A young woman in a high-collared gown is being escorted inside. She keeps her chin raised, eyes fixed straight ahead. Her name is Margaret Hales, and she is on trial for poisoning her fiancé with a love tonic. You slip in behind the spectators, blending with the smell of damp wool and ink. The courtroom is hushed, but the tension is electric. On the table lies a small green bottle, stoppered in wax, its label barely legible. The lawyer lifts it with a handkerchief, careful not to smear what might still be evidence. The charge? Attempted murder via love potion. The defense? She claims it was only meant to make him more affectionate. Margaret says she bought the potion from a woman in Spitalfields who swore it would make her fiancé less cold, less suspicious, less obsessed with her dowry. Instead, he collapsed during dinner, vomited blood, survived, but barely. Historians still argue whether this case was typical or simply a high-profile anomaly. Victorian legal records are littered with poisonings, but not all of them were about love. Some were vengeance. Some were inheritance. But when they were about love, the line between affection and attack got wonderfully, terribly blurred. You lean against the back wall and glance at the court clerk's notes. They include words like belladonna, mandrake, and stomach erosion. The judge frowns over his glasses. "What did you intend, Miss Hales?" he asks. She doesn't flinch. "I wanted him to stop shouting, to listen, to soften." That's not exactly illegal, but it isn't exactly comforting either. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Love potions weren't illegal in themselves, but the ingredients often were, which created a loophole. People could claim they meant no harm, just longing. And when the person on the receiving end happened to die, well, whoops. You peek through a bundle of old newspapers stacked in the courthouse lobby. One headline reads, "Potion of Passion Turns Fatal. Young Widow's Brew Kills Lover in Bath." Another, "Lady in White, the Belladonna Bride of Sussex." And one from years earlier, "Parlor Maid Confesses to Years of Slow Poisoning. He Didn't Deserve Me," says diary. You turn the pages carefully. The ink smudges. But the stories are all the same at their core. Someone wanted more than they were allowed. Someone took matters into their own hands, and someone else paid for it with confusion, with pain, with death. Fringe fact. In 1863, a woman named Mary Taylor was tried in Derbyshire for administering a noxious substance under false pretenses. The substance was a homemade cordial of rosemary and wormwood with just a touch of arsenic. Her defense? She'd read about it in a book of home remedies. The judge didn't buy it. You drift back into the present courtroom as the lawyer begins to read from a book titled The Secrets of Matrimonial Chemistry. Supposedly, it's where Margaret got the idea. It's filled with recipes, most harmless, some dubious. One chapter is titled To Restore Lost Affection or Subdue an Overbearing Temper. Another, Concoctions for Charm and Obedience. That's the part that makes the gallery murmur. Because now everyone's asking the same thing you are. Was she trying to win his heart or erase his will? The difference matters, or at least it should. The verdict comes down with the slow certainty of a gavel drop. Guilty, not of attempted murder, but of administering a dangerous substance without consent. She'll serve time, not long. Enough to be ruined, but not forgotten. As she's led away, someone in the crowd whispers, "He'll never find another woman who loved him that much." Another mutters, "Or hated him that quietly." You step outside into the gray light. A young man sits on the courthouse steps, pale and shaking. He holds a handkerchief up to his mouth. It's streaked with pink. You don't ask who he loved, or who might have wanted him softer. But as you walk, the scent of roses trails behind you. Not real ones, the perfume kind. And you wonder just how many courtships were coaxed along with these potions. How many yeses were whispered under the influence of something brewed in a kitchen, bought in an alley, or dropped discreetly into a glass of wine. There's a record from 1859 in your mind now. A nobleman found unconscious, his lips stained crimson. The housemaid swore it was just a cordial. He looked tired, she said. No charges were filed. That's the thing about potions. They don't leave fingerprints, and most times the ones who used them didn't want to harm. Not really. They just wanted to be chosen, desired, safe. You pause near a fountain in the square. Coins gleam at the bottom, dull under the water. You toss in a penny just for tradition's sake. A wish, maybe. But let's be honest. If you'd lived in 1842 and your heart was breaking, your dowry dwindling, your suitor disinterested, and your options shrinking by the day, wouldn't you have taken the bottle too? Even if it didn't work. Even if it did. You stroll into a drawing room just as a young woman stumbles backward from the mirror, clutching a tiny jar in one gloved hand and a lace-edged pamphlet in the other. Her name is Beatrice, and she's just followed the final instruction in a book called How to Ensnare a Gentleman Without Saying a Word. Step 1. Arsenic. Not the lethal kind. Not yet. Just a pinch in her morning cocoa. Every day. Enough to pale the skin, widen the eyes, flush the cheeks. Victorian women called it complexion water. Doctors called it suicide in slow motion. You move closer and glance at her reflection. She's pretty, but her eyelids twitch. The poison is working, and she's only just begun. This is what it took in a world where catching a husband was a competitive sport, and your face was your only advertisement. You couldn't speak your mind, couldn't ask for what you wanted, but you could make yourself glow, even if it killed you. And that's where things get truly bizarre. Arsenic wasn't just taken internally, it was sold as soap, powder, lotion. You open the vanity drawer and find a tin labeled Dr. Campbell's Beautifying Wafers, a fringe bestseller. Ingredients: chalk, arsenic, and blind faith. They swore it cured freckles. In reality, it just burned the pigment out. You shake your head as Beatrice flips the pamphlet to the next page. To attract a duke, or anyone of note, apply 3 drops of laudanum to tongue. Smile infrequently. Avoid direct light. Laugh only behind a handkerchief. Historians still debate whether these guides were satire or actual advice. The line between mockery and method was so thin, you could cut it with a hat pin. You wander to the side table where a stack of books waits. One is a courtship manual titled Hints for Proper Engagement. It warns women not to speak first, not to touch a gentleman, and under no circumstances to look eager. You blink. That's most of being alive. And yet, women like Beatrice had to find workarounds. The accidental brush of the hand. The strategic fainting spell. The smile that vanished before it fully formed. It was performance, down to the drop. You hear footsteps in the hallway. Beatrice's mother appears, tall and stiff, clutching a bouquet of violets. "You didn't use the arsenic soap again, did you?" she says sharply. Beatrice lies. Her mother softens. "Good. That's only for special occasions, like garden parties or second proposals." You sigh, because here's the ugly truth. Arsenic was sold as hope, bottled, boxed, and tied with ribbon. A small sacrifice, the labels read, for a larger love. You flip open a pocketbook nearby and discover a pressed flower and a note. Remember, he prefers pale girls. Beneath it, another scribble. He said my breath smelled like metal. Of course it did. She's dying from the inside out. One mainstream fact: Victorian pharmacists sold Fowler's solution, a diluted arsenic tonic, to treat everything from syphilis to anemia to, you guessed it, melancholy. The side effect was often death, but hey, at least you'd be radiant for the funeral. And it wasn't just women. Men had their own rituals. You peek into a gentleman's dressing room and find a jar of styptic elixir, meant to tighten skin and increase jawline virility. The key ingredient? Alum, which burns. But looking sharp was worth a little pain, especially if you were planning to flirt near the punch bowl. Also nearby, a bottle of violet-scented beard oil laced with camphor. Stimulates the blood, the label says, and probably the rash. The irony? All these efforts, the arsenic, the rouge, the laudanum, the tight corsets, and crushed toes, weren't about comfort. They were about appearing effortless, as if your cheeks flushed naturally, as if your waist was born that narrow, as if love simply found you on a breeze. You close the cabinet and return to the sitting room just as Beatrice sneaks a drop of something into her teacup. Not poison, not today, just essence of lemon blossom and valerian, a calming tonic. She's nervous. Her suitor is due to call. When he enters, she rises slowly, hands trembling. He bows. She curtsies. They speak of weather, church, nothing real. He compliments her complexion. She smiles faintly. She's already won. Or maybe he has. Because this game, this performance, it's one-sided. Her every glance, every powder, every fragile giggle is calculated to suit his preferences. His affections are the prize, and herself, piece by piece, is the offering. You retreat toward the window. Outside, a group of girls passes by, chattering behind gloves. One of them pulls a vial from her reticule and dabs it at her throat. You recognize the label, Liquid Radiance. It contains lead. Her skin glows under the lamplight. So many potions, so many promises. But beneath the rouge and arsenic, the real question lingers. Who are you when you're not trying to be loved? No one dared ask it. Not then. Maybe not even now. You push open a brass-handled door under a swinging shingle that reads, Dr. Thaddeus Blight, Specialist in Matrimonial Well-Being. Inside, it smells like mothballs, licorice, and old books. The wallpaper is peeling, the lighting dim, and behind the mahogany desk sits the good doctor himself, bald, bespectacled, and humming a lullaby he probably shouldn't know. This is not a real doctor. Not really. But in the Victorian era, being qualified was more about confidence in tailoring than medical degrees. And Dr. Blight, he has plenty of both. You take a seat. The cushions wheeze beneath you. On the wall hangs a framed newspaper clipping. Blight's patent passion pills. Rekindle the flame in just one dose. Below it, a sepia-toned photo of a woman in a bonnet, looking positively scandalized. He clears his throat and gestures to the shelf beside him. Bottles, powders, and little folded cards, labeled Emergency Boudoir Blend, Affection Fortifier, and, you have to squint, Restraint Extract for over-eager suitors. You raise an eyebrow. He beams. Victorian doctors like Blight peddled every imaginable love-related cure. Heartache? Try laudanum. Passionless marriage? Mix in some digitalis. Lack of romantic spark? There's always frog's legs boiled in gin. That one, according to a very creative pamphlet, stimulates both memory and the loins. Historians still argue whether quack doctors like Blight actually believed in their potions or simply exploited a desperate public. The truth, like the scent of the waiting room, is murky. You watch as a woman in a green dress enters, eyes darting nervously. She requests something to bring back his tenderness. The doctor nods solemnly and produces a vial of essence of warm regard. It smells like cloves and kerosene. 3 drops at bedtime, he advises. On his pillow, never in his tea. That would be unethical. You chuckle under your breath. Ethics have clearly taken the day off. The woman leaves. Next is a gentleman with a twitch in his left eye. She won't look at me, he says. Not like before. Dr. Blight hums, then selects a packet of boldness powder wrapped in red paper. Take with wine, he says. And don't write any poetry afterward. That always ruins it. You lean closer to examine a case of pills. They promise things like verbal clarity, romantic verve, and proper masculine humors. One of them simply reads, For Tuesdays. You flip through his appointment ledger. Names scribbled in cursive. Notes in shorthand. One entry reads, Mrs. E. hysteria, possible resentment toward spouse. Administered bittersweet tincture. Recommended vigorous piano playing. Another, Mr. T, fear of romantic failure. Prescribed vapor rub and firm encouragement. Quackery, sure. But there's something else at work here. Desperation, yes, but also trust. People came to men like Blight not just for solutions, they came for permission. Permission to feel strange, to want more, to confess things they couldn't say out loud at tea. Fringe fact? One popular cure involved electrocution, gentle zaps to the back, legs, or neck, meant to realign emotional imbalance. Some doctors even claimed it could stir passion in the melancholic. The only thing stirred was likely their hair. And then there were treatments involving friction. You know the kind. Ahem. Gentlemen with mustaches and very serious faces administering pelvic massages to women suffering from hysteria. It was a booming business. So booming, in fact, that the first vibrators were invented just to give physicians a break from the wrist strain. But let's stay classy. You glance at the poster on the wall. It shows a diagram of a woman's nervous system with arrows pointing from the heart to the stomach, then to the feet. It's nonsense, of course, but printed nonsense looks very official. Dr. Blight offers you a pamphlet as you leave. It's titled The Gentleman's Guide to Intimate Restoration. There are no diagrams, just vague promises, confusing ingredients, and a footnote recommending moderate consumption of asparagus. You exit through the back, into an alley littered with bottles, empty, cracked, leaking. You pick one up. The label's still legible. Elixir of subtle confidence. It smells like peppermint and betrayal. Because the truth is, these potions weren't really about love. They were about fixing love, or pretending to. In a world where marriage was status, affection was currency, and talking about feelings was considered gauche, people reached for pills, powders, and professionals with names like Dr. Blight. The strangest part? Some of it probably worked. Not because the medicine was effective, but because the ritual was. The act of trying, of hoping, of swallowing something in faith that maybe this time they'd feel desired, or less alone. You pause beside a trash heap where an open ledger flutters in the breeze. One last scribbled note reads, "Her husband hasn't looked at her in months. She says she doesn't mind, but she keeps coming back for the tonic anyway." You close the book, because maybe deep down she does mind, and maybe a bottle labeled love is better than none at all. You pass through a velvet curtain into a warm, windowless room. The walls are covered in faded wallpaper, floral, and a little frayed at the edges. There's a settee in the corner, and on it, a woman lies back, corset slightly loosened, eyes half-lidded. A doctor, sits beside her, sleeves rolled, hands oiled, face professionally blank. This is not what it looks like. Except it absolutely is. Welcome to the delicate, twitchy underworld of Victorian hysteria treatments, a polite term for something far less polite, and incredibly common. Back then, hysteria was a catch-all diagnosis for almost anything a woman might feel. Anxiety, sadness, boredom, ambition, desire, irritability, even indigestion. The solution? A visit to the physician for a pelvic massage, meant to trigger something called paroxysm. We call it something else now. You settle in the corner chair, watching the scene unfold with a strange blend of disbelief and secondhand awkwardness. The woman sighs softly. The physician's expression doesn't change. It's all very professional, very clinical, very Victorian. Historians still debate how much everyone involved actually understood what was happening. Were doctors genuinely unaware of what they were doing? Were women just playing along to get a few minutes of relief from their corseted prison lives? Was the entire society performing a grand, hushed pantomime? The answer is probably yes, to all of it. You glance around the room. There are bottles of lavender oil, camphor, and peppermint. Soothing. Innocent. On a shelf sits a manual titled, On the Nervous Constitution of the Female Mind. The author's portrait shows a man with sideburns and an expression like he's never spoken to a woman without supervision. The book claims that hysteria is caused by disruption of internal vapors. One suggested treatment, warm compresses, and vigorous piano playing. Another, a Turkish bath followed by light flogging. You try not to smile, because in a way the whole thing is absurd, but also heartbreakingly logical. Victorian women were trapped in lives of constant performance. Obedient daughters, decorative wives, angelic mothers. No space to want, no space to rage, no language for either, so they did what they could. Fainted, wept, became hysterical, and society, rather than asking what was wrong, decided to fix them with a firm hand and a scented oil. Fringe fact: the vibrator was patented in the 1880s, not as a sexual device, but as a labor-saving tool for doctors. Treatments took a long time. Some patients came in weekly. The invention saved wrists and reputations. You wander toward the wash basin, where a tray holds cloths soaked in rosewater and valerian. One still steams slightly. The patient exhales. The doctor murmurs something about nervous discharge. You don't ask for clarification. In the adjoining room, you find a couch and a low, worn ottoman, a different kind of treatment area. On the table beside it sits a bell jar with a small coil, one of those early electric contraptions. It buzzes faintly. There's a plaque that reads, Galvanic Harmonizer for Womb and Nerves. You blink. Because in this era, if it buzzed, tingled, or tinged the air with ozone, Victorians trusted it. Electricity was thrilling. New, a cure-all. And when applied to restless ladies, it promised miracles, or at least a temporary daze. One pamphlet claims, releases congested feminine tensions and promotes a cheerful demeanor. Another reads simply, soothes the sensitive spirit. The real problem wasn't hysteria. It was loneliness, boredom, repression, the ache of needing to express something in a world that only let you embroider it on a handkerchief. You pass through a corridor where soft music plays. A faint, distant piano, slightly off-key. Another patient waits here, clutching a parasol she won't let go of. Her appointment is in 15 minutes. Her hair is perfect. Her smile is not. You sit beside her for a moment. She doesn't speak, just watches the clock tick forward like it owes her something. Then you find the ledger, tucked behind a stack of towels. Names, times, notes. Mrs. L. 3 sessions. Paroxysm reached twice. Husband reports improved mood. Miss C. Nervous temperament. Prefers galvanic treatment. Recommends longer sessions. Mrs. A. Requests discretion. Husband unaware. Appears less irritable post-treatment. You close the book gently. The saddest part is not that it happened. The saddest part is that this was often the only way women could get physical attention without shame. Not intimacy, not pleasure, just the excuse of medicine, the performance of healing, hiding the very thing that might have helped them most, honest connection. As you head toward the door, you glance back at the treatment room. It's quiet now. The doctor scribbles in his notes. The patient adjusts her skirts and rises slowly. Neither says goodbye. They never do. Outside, the street is bright. Children run past. A man tips his hat. The world keeps turning. But you carry with you the lingering scent of lavender and laudanum, and the memory of a sigh that was half relief, half sadness. Because in that softly lit room, Women tried to reclaim something they'd been taught to ignore: their own bodies, their own needs, their right to feel. And the only language they were allowed to use was a diagnosis. You wander now into a boudoir as still as a museum. The curtains are drawn. The light is soft and golden, filtered through lace like secrets through a keyhole. Everything glows faintly with powder, blush, rice flour, and beeswax. You step lightly across the carpet, where a hairbrush lies half buried in a cascade of curling irons, hat pins, and ribbons. This is where the transformation happens. On the vanity, there's an open pot of rouge, clay red, made from crushed carmine beetles. A thin sheen of wax glistens atop it, catching the lamplight like a drop of blood. A woman stands before the mirror. She leans in, puckers her lips, and applies a layer of lip pomade of the East. It's beeswax, oil of roses, and cinnabar, also known as mercury sulfide. Toxic, yes, but it gives a beautiful shine. She dabs at her cheeks next, working in rouge with 2 fingers and a dream. She doesn't flinch as a curl from her wig singes on the nearby gas lamp. Historians still argue how aware women were of the dangers of these beauty tools. Some likely knew, at least in whispers, but with limited options and high stakes, danger was often just the price of appearing desirable. You peek into a little drawer beneath the mirror and find a box labeled Batwing Curlers. Inside, a small iron contraption shaped like delicate wings, designed to heat and twist hair into fashionable spirals. The instructions warn: use over flame. Do not apply when hair is damp. You chuckle. The faint smell of scorched hair suggests someone didn't read that last part. Another box reveals false side curls, sewn from human hair, often collected from the poor or dead and sold at market. These pieces were clipped just behind the ears and hidden under a bonnet. You touch one. It's soft, coiled, and still smells faintly of someone else's soap. You glance up. The woman in the mirror blinks back at you. She adds a drop of belladonna to each eye. Her pupils widen, glistening like pools of ink. It makes her look dreamy, willing, slightly otherworldly. Also, her vision is now blurred, but that's a minor inconvenience. Nearby, a pot of whitening paste sits open, drying along the rim. It's made of lead, egg whites, and vinegar, meant to smooth the skin and erase blemishes. It also causes paralysis and facial collapse if used long enough. And still, it was sold out at every chemist. You sit gently on the edge of the chaise longue, beside a half-laced corset and a pair of silk stockings. Everything here speaks of transformation, becoming. The tight waist, the uplifted bust, the waxed lips and soot-darkened lashes, all designed to project a very particular kind of fantasy. But like any costume, it requires upkeep, maintenance, performance. You find a small hand mirror etched with a note on the back, for when he looks closely. Beneath it, a packet of pearly drops, a tooth whitener made with hydrochloric acid. It eroded enamel, but left a brilliant gleam for a little while. Quirky fact? Victorian women often used matches to darken their lashes, burning the ends slightly, then smudging the soot into a makeshift mascara. One false move, and you'd go from mysterious to monocular. You glance toward the closet. Inside, wigs hang like sleeping cats, their curls bouncing lightly as the door creaks open. A card pinned to one reads, "For humid nights." Another, "Ball ready, scented with jasmine." The wigs were often layered with scented powders, not just for allure, but to cover the smell of sweat and singed hair. Gas lamps were not forgiving, neither were expectations. A velvet glove lies on the floor. Inside it, a small note. Remember, smile less, glance sideways, breathe deeply, never speak of pain. Outside, a carriage rolls by, and a man's voice calls a name. The woman before the mirror adjusts her wig, stands, and steps carefully into her heels. She's ready. Or at least, she looks ready. And that, in this world, is enough. You follow her out the door and into the corridor, where two other women wait, fanning themselves lightly. One whispers, "Your lips are bleeding again." The other says, "It's fashionable." Then they laugh, gently, bitterly, like they've heard that joke too many times. You pause in front of a vanity tray holding a glass perfume bottle labeled L'Affliction Douce. The scent? Amber, myrrh, lilac, and something sharper underneath. A note tucked beneath reads, "He said I smelled like memory. Then he left anyway." You step out onto the balcony where night has fallen. Candles flicker below, lighting the garden path. From up here, you can see the entire charade. Powder, paint, posture. A parade of beauty rituals designed not to express, but to control. To show just enough, and never too much. Because Victorian beauty wasn't about being seen, it was about being wanted. And those are two very different things. As the stars rise, you realize something strange. These women weren't trying to deceive. They were trying to survive, to compete, to be chosen. And if that meant mercury on their lips and someone else's hair on their scalp, so be it. Because in a world that punished boldness and rewarded silence, appearance was the loudest thing a woman could say. You step through a side door into a grand ballroom where chandeliers drip with wax and the air quivers with perfume and possibility. The music floats, slow, swelling, hypnotic. You feel it in your chest before you even hear it. Strings, a hush, then the pulse of a waltz. But this isn't just a party, it's a battlefield. Welcome to the masquerade. Every gloved hand, every lowered gaze, every delicate tap of a fan carries more coded meaning than 100 love letters. You watch the dancers swirl past in a cloud of silk and cologne. Their masks are ornate. Lace, feathers, sequins. But what they're hiding isn't just their faces. It's everything else. A woman in black velvet moves past you, mask tight against her cheekbones. She drops her glove, accidentally. A man picks it up. Their eyes lock. That's not a flirtation. It's a proposition. You watch them vanish into the corner stairwell. Masquerade balls in Victorian society were a strange loophole, an escape hatch. They allowed for just enough anonymity to let desires slip free, at least for one night. And behind the elegance? Oh, the scandals were delicious. You follow the curve of the room toward the refreshment table. There's champagne, of course, and punch laced with rum and possibly something stronger. Beside it, a tray of little sugared confections, supposedly peppermint, but you catch a whiff of valerian and myrrh. Sedative? Love charm? Who can say? You lean against the marble pillar, watching a gentleman with too much cologne press a card into a woman's palm. She doesn't open it, but she doesn't let go of it either. Historians still argue how much actually happened at these events and how much was exaggerated in the diaries afterward. But one thing's certain, people came to these balls hoping for something they couldn't name during daylight. A taste, a touch, a whisper. You wander upstairs to the gallery where the air is cooler, quieter. Couples stand in shadowed alcoves. One pair pretends to admire the paintings. The man gestures at a portrait, an aristocratic woman with a swan around her neck, and murmurs something into his companion's ear. She laughs, then shushes him with a finger across his lips. There's a flutter of lace. A lock of hair falls from a poorly pinned wig. He tucks it behind her ear, like it's a sacred rite. The fringe fact: at some of these masquerades, secret languages were used. Hand signals, fan positions, mask colors. A red feather might mean taken. A black mask could mean interested. Folding your fan a certain way might mean follow me. Dropping it? Take the hint. The balls were choreographed chaos. The safest way to be reckless. You sit beside a half-finished glass of sherry and spot a note tucked beneath it. Meet me in the conservatory. Bring no questions. You do not recognize the handwriting. You do not need to. Downstairs again, the music swells. A woman in lavender lace is surrounded by 3 men, all vying for her dance card. She pretends not to notice. Her perfume leaves a trail, jasmine and something sharp. You follow it just a little. It pulls at something under your ribs. You pass a gentleman with a drawn-on mustache. His laughter is too loud. His cuff is smeared with rouge, not his own. He winks at you. You do not return it. In the side salon, a young woman collapses onto a fainting couch. Too much excitement, someone says, or too much elderflower cordial. Someone else whispers, she always faints around the same men. It's not judgment, it's respect. Because here, in this gaslit dream of a night, women could test their power without having to ask for it. Flirtation wasn't just allowed, it was expected. And the stakes, deliciously high. You open a fan left behind on the windowsill. Inside the folds, a tiny note is tucked. He wears gloves to hide the ring. Tonight, he takes them off. Another one. If she dances the 6th waltz with him, it's done. You tuck them back carefully. You are merely a guest in this theater. And as the music slows, a man removes his mask. His face is flushed. His eyes search. He does not find who he's looking for, because the masquerade always ends. And when it does, the masks come off, the fans close. The coded notes vanish like perfume in fog. But for a few hours, in a room full of candlelight and soft deceptions, everyone remembers what it feels like to want without asking, to touch without speaking, to pretend, if only briefly, that rules were meant for someone else. Outside, the carriages line up like shadows. The night is nearly spent. A woman pulls her cloak tight, her cheeks still flushed. A man follows, careful not to step on her train. No one asks what was said in the garden. No one dares. And the ballroom door closes gently behind you. You drift into a quiet study, lined with dark oak shelves and velvet drapes drawn tight against the dawn. The fire here burns low, as if trying not to disturb the hush that hangs over everything. You step softly, avoiding the creak in the floorboards, and run your fingers along the spines of the books. The Principles of Courtship, Moral Physiology, The Young Wife's Companion. And then, something different. Tucked beneath a faux Bible lies a slim volume with a cracked leather spine and no title. You open it carefully. The pages are soft, smudged, and dog-eared, read many times, always in secret. This is where the real education happened. Victorians loved to pretend they knew nothing of passion, but behind the parlor's polished manners lived a whole private world of forbidden books. Hidden in locked drawers, sewn into false covers, or slipped between piano sheet music, these texts were how many women and men discovered what no one would say aloud. You sit in the armchair beside the fire and begin to read. The language is veiled, of course, always metaphor. The warming of the female constitution, the urgent stirrings of manly affection, the unspoken appetite of the gentle wife. You raise an eyebrow. This isn't instruction. It's longing. Historians still argue whether these books were intended as titillation or as genuine rebellion against silence. But either way, they existed because silence wasn't enough, and people wanted to know. You flip to a page halfway through. An illustration, 2 figures in silhouette, too close to be polite, yet drawn with delicate brushstrokes. It's not pornography. Not quite. It's something more dangerous. Suggestion. You close the book and peek into the drawer beneath the writing desk. More volumes, some with titles like Secrets of the Marital Chamber and a manual for nervous brides. One includes a diagram of female anatomy, so incorrect you actually feel offended on its behalf. But beneath it all lies a pamphlet, yellowed and brittle, titled simply, The Book of Venus. No author, no publisher. Inside, poems, some clumsy, others tender, all written by someone who clearly felt more than they were allowed to say. One reads, "She looked at me, not as a lady ought, but as one who knew the scent of night." I trembled, not from fear or shame, but because I knew she was right. You pause. These weren't just guides. They were lifelines, escape hatches, a place to imagine what couldn't be lived out loud. Another volume, smaller and bound in blue velvet, opens with a pencil sketch. Two women sitting by a fireplace, one with her head on the other's shoulder. No title, no names, just a private moment drawn by candlelight. Fringe fact, some Victorian women kept romantic friendships, intense emotionally charged relationships with other women that often mirrored marriage in everything but name. Society allowed them, so long as they weren't acknowledged. These books became their only mirror. You look up, and in the far corner of the room sits a cabinet with a false back. You pry it open. Inside are letters, dozens of them, tied with red ribbon, written on thick parchment in delicate script, some addressed only with initials. You open one. My dearest A. He thinks I sleep when I write these, but I never do. You are the only dream I want. Another. Today I wore the scent you left behind. He noticed, but he does not know what it means. You place the letters back as if they might burn in your hands, because they are heavy. Real. The ache in them, too intimate to belong to strangers. One more book, hidden beneath the cushion of the window seat. This one is titled, How to Be Touched Without Being Seen. You open it, every page is blank. Of course it is. Because that's the unspoken rule. The moment you try to speak of real hunger, real want, the page disappears. That was the Victorian trick. Allow everything to exist, just not in daylight, not where anyone might name it. You return to the fireplace. The embers are glowing now. The heat is low but steady. On the mantel sits a small mirror. You catch your reflection, and for a second, you swear you see someone else's eyes looking back. Tired, curious, maybe remembering. Because these stories aren't just about what was hidden. They're about who had to hide, and how, even in a world of silence and starch, some still found ways to whisper. Yo. You descend into a stone kitchen, the kind with a low ceiling and soot-darkened beams, where everything smells of smoke, salt, and secrets passed between generations. The walls are hung with bundles of drying herbs, not for cooking, but for other purposes. And sitting at the table is a woman in a worn shawl, crushing something dark and sticky with a mortar and pestle. She doesn't look up when you enter, just keeps muttering to herself in rhythm with each grind. You know instantly, this is not your average housemaid. This is where things get a little weird, and a little close. Because while most Victorian love potions were harmless, or at least only mildly harmful, there existed recipes passed in whispers, scribbled in margins, or spoken over grave soil that veered hard into the "what were they thinking" category, like this one. She finishes grinding and lifts the lid from a small ceramic jar. Inside is a dark red liquid. You lean in. It smells metallic, sweet, earthy, familiar. Too familiar. She's made one of the more infamous folk recipes, an affection binder brewed with menstrual blood. Yes, really. Historians still can't agree how widespread this was, or whether it was ever truly used beyond isolated folklore. But records exist, and more importantly, the belief existed that a drop of blood, that blood, mixed into wine or broth, could bind someone's heart forever. The woman pours it into a small bottle, seals it with wax, and tucks it under the floorboard, next to a bundle of nettle, a broken ring, and a curl of black hair tied in linen. You back away slowly, trying not to breathe too loudly. This wasn't a trick from the upper-class salons. This was hedge magic, folk ritual, desire made physical with whatever tools were available. Roots, bones, herbs, spit, dreams, and sometimes body fluids. Another woman enters, younger. She looks scared but determined. "He's going to marry her," she whispers. But he looked at me. He felt something. The older woman nods, pulls down a bundle of dried roses, and begins to pluck the petals into a pot. Into it goes. Crushed eggshells, for clarity. A spoonful of honey, for sweetness. A drop of candle wax from a wedding, for inversion. And a piece of a letter he wrote. You watch as the ingredients dissolve in a simmering pot. The scent is oddly beautiful, like love, sweet, warm, and just a little bit dangerous. Fringe fact? In some European traditions, spell books from the 18th and 19th centuries suggested combining moon water, ashes from a burned love letter, and fingernail clippings for binding the beloved. The line between Old World magic and Victorian superstition was often thin and smoke-blurred. Back at the table, the older woman hands the girl a small cloth bag, tied tight with twine and sealed with a wax sigil you don't recognize. Bury it near his doorstep, she says. He'll dream of you, whether he wants to or not. You feel the chill crawl up your spine, not because it's evil, but because it's desperate. That kind of wanting doesn't ask permission. It just wants. You glance at a small notebook open on the table. Its pages are warped with age and steam. Each recipe is written in a different hand. One reads, "To arouse the eye and unravel the tongue. Mint steeped in wine. A broken mirror's shard ground to dust. One word whispered after midnight 3 times while standing in running water. Another, for unwanted affection. Crushed coal. Rosemary for memory loss. A thorn from a dead rose. Seal in an envelope. Do not send. Just burn." Some of these were more symbolic than literal, but symbols can be powerful when you're denied direct action. You poke through a basket and find a glass vial half full of something glittering faintly silver. A note attached reads, "Moon water, drawn on the 7th night. Do not use on Thursdays." You don't ask why. Some things are better left unexplained. In the corner of the hearth sits a blackened cauldron. More fairy tale than science, sure. But here it's very real. A string of beads dangles over it, swaying gently in the heat. You reach out and touch one. It's smooth. Bone, not glass. You back away. Because this room is heavy with wanting, with spells cast out of hunger and frustration and heartbreak. And while most of them probably didn't work in the literal sense, that's not the point. The point was doing something. When the man you loved walked past you every day with someone else on his arm. When your parents had already signed a marriage contract with a man who barely looked at your face. When desire had to be swallowed or smothered or translated into poetry. Nobody read. You might find yourself grinding eggshells into wine and whispering his name into a candle. And maybe it wouldn't make him love you. But for a moment, you'd feel less powerless, less invisible, and that alone could be magic. Outside, the sky begins to lighten. Morning. The spellmakers sweep the floor, clean the pots, fold the cloth bags, and reset the room. By day, it'll smell like soup and sour bread again. But you'll remember what brewed here in the dark, and so will she. Mo. You leave the kitchen behind and follow a narrow, creaking hallway toward a bedroom filled with the quiet rustle of lace and ambition. There, in the half-light, sits a woman at her vanity, spooning crushed gems into a bowl like she's seasoning soup. Her hands are steady. Her expression? Not love-struck, calculating. This isn't the kind of love potion you've come to expect. This is something colder. Because not all Victorian love magic was about yearning or passion. Some of it was strategic, a play, a performance, a gamble. And in that gamble, gemstones weren't just for rings. They were for grinding. You step closer and see the fine glitter in the bowl, sapphire dust, maybe a fleck of emerald, mixed with powdered eggshells, bone ash, and lemon oil. A potion for loyalty, the note reads, or perhaps one for forgetfulness. Historians still debate how often gems were actually used in love spells. Realistically? Rarely, but symbolically, constantly. Crushed diamonds represented clarity. Pearls stood for innocence, or the illusion of it. Opals. Dangerous. Said to bring bad luck unless they were gifted by a lover. You glance at the open book beside her. Its margin reads, "To inspire longing, add dust from a mirror cracked at twilight. For breaking engagement, a drop of vinegar with a sliver of quartz." You move to the window, where a dream catcher of sorts hangs, made not of feathers, but scraps of lace, string, and jewelry pieces. It clinks faintly in the breeze. Each charm represents a different man, you suspect. Some caught, some discarded. The woman, Marguerite, you now imagine, stands suddenly. She checks her reflection, adjusts the fall of her shawl. She picks up the small vial of crushed gemstone mixture and pours it carefully into a silver locket. Closes it, presses it to her lips. Not every spell needs to be drunk. Some only need to be worn. Quirky fact. Some Victorians believed that hiding charms close to the skin, inside corsets, garters, or brooches, could influence the thoughts of others nearby, like a psychic whisper or a fashionable curse. You slip into the adjoining room. Another woman is reading from a slim blue book titled Love Tokens and Private Mysteries. Her fingers pause on a page. To secure the affection of one whose heart is unsure, burn a letter he has written, mix the ashes with rose water, and trace his name upon your wrist each night before sleep. She closes the book and sighs. She's already done it, and it didn't work. Or maybe it did, just not in the way she hoped. You glance at the table beside her. It holds a torn lace glove, a wilted pansy, and a necklace missing its clasp. Keepsakes, not gifts, evidence. That's the thing about these spells. They weren't always cast to gain love. Sometimes they were for holding on to love that was already slipping, or punishing someone who didn't return it. You find a hidden compartment in the desk drawer. Inside, a rolled scroll with a single phrase written in calligraphy. Let him remember me and forget peace. Suddenly, the perfume on the table smells different. Sharper, less like roses, more like warning. The Victorians, for all their prudery, understood longing better than we give them credit for. They understood that wanting wasn't always so sweet. Sometimes it was bitter, ferocious, devouring. And sometimes when love soured, the very items that once symbolized it, gems, petals, ribbon, were repurposed into tools of quiet vengeance. You sit for a moment in the embroidered chair beside the fire. A small diary lies nearby. The handwriting is tight, angry, purposeful. He promised her pearls. He gave me promises. I'll grind them both. You don't know if she means the pearls or the girl. Maybe both. You look at the hearth. There's ash and a sparkle of crushed shell. fringe detail? Some Victorian breakup rituals involved burying love letters in graveyards. Others instructed the burning of shared photographs alongside dried herbs, rosemary for remembrance, bay for finality. The heart breaks, but it acts. You return to Marguerite's room just as she opens a second drawer. This one holds a folded note from a suitor. You are not the girl I imagined, but I find myself captivated all the same. She scoffs softly, tucks it into her slipper, picks up her locket. She's ready, not to fall in love, not even to be adored. She's ready to win. Because Victorian women weren't always soft, swooning things, waiting for permission. Some of them studied charms like they were strategies, brewed tonics like they were weapons, filed away compliments like weapons too. And when the potions didn't work, they adapted. They smiled sweeter, tightened the corset, wrote a better letter, faked a faint in the middle of the right conversation, and when all else failed, they turned their back, crushed the rose quartz under heel, and left him spellbound. The rain is falling now, steady and rhythmic, a soft percussion against the windows as you step into the back parlor of a narrow London townhouse. The air is thick with heat, perfume, and something else entirely, secrecy. Because behind this door lies another hidden current in the world of Victorian love, the kind that couldn't be named, not out loud anyway. You take in the scene slowly. A pair of gloves rests on the piano. A man's coat, too finely tailored for the house's modest decor, hangs on the rack, and before the mirror stands someone tightening the laces of their corset. The only twist? It's not who you'd expect. The figure turns slightly and you see the truth. This is not a woman, but a man, carefully applying rouge to his cheeks, securing his wig, adjusting a silk ribbon at the throat. Every movement is practiced, graceful, not performed for spectacle, but for peace. This is not a costume. This is sanctuary. Historians still argue how common cross-dressing was in the Victorian period and what it meant for those who did it. Was it rebellion, expression, a coded language of identity? Maybe all three. The truth, like everything in this era, was layered, whispered, and sometimes buried in footnotes. You move past the wardrobe, where a second corset hangs beside a man's waistcoat, 2 sets of shoes, 2 toothbrushes. In this house, the division between man and woman isn't rigid, it's fluid. And behind the heavy velvet curtains, it is safe, at least for tonight. In the chair by the fire sits another figure, a woman smoking from a long amber holder, dressed in a tailored jacket and cravat. Her trousers are creased. Her gaze is sharp. You don't ask if she's visiting. This is her home. These two, whatever their names may be, have created a world apart from the rules. They walk a line between what's acceptable and what's necessary. And here, behind locked doors, they've rewritten the story. You sit on the settee and notice a small journal tucked between the cushions. Inside, "Tonight, we walk together." He held my hand. In public, we are brothers. In private, we are free. Another entry reads, "She borrowed my perfume again, said it reminded her of the ocean. I told her I didn't need it back." These are not confessions. They are affirmations, reminders that their lives, though unacknowledged by society, are no less real, no less full of love. You open the drawer beside the bed and find a little bottle labeled Velvet Intentions. The scent? Lavender, sage, and just the faintest whiff of gunpowder. Bold, intoxicating, meant to unsettle. It lingers on both collars, his and hers. Fringe fact: some gender nonconforming individuals in the Victorian era lived double lives, dressing one way by day and another at night. A few even passed entirely, serving in military units, managing households, or courting women while presenting as men. And when they were discovered, their stories were often erased or rewritten into something more palatable. But not all were hidden. You move to the writing desk and find letters bound in black ribbon. Not secret, but not boastful. Sent across cities, across borders, signed only with initials. My dearest Jay, the night you slept with your head on my chest, I stopped believing I was alone. Beneath it, a photograph. 2 figures, same height, same eyes, dressed identically in dark coats and wide-brimmed hats. The caption, Brighton, 1881. They stare at the camera with neither shame nor apology, and in the bookshelf beside the fireplace, tucked behind volumes of Greek poetry and romantic novels, you find a battered copy of Sappho and the Taming of Spring. The spine is cracked. Certain passages are underlined in red. One has a pressed pansy slipped between the pages. The pansy, you may recall, was a subtle code in Victorian flower language for "I think of you." Among some circles, it became a symbol of queer affection. Small bouquets of violets and pansies were exchanged silently, passed hand to hand, hidden in books, or tucked into gloves. You hear footsteps now in the hallway. The corseted figure returns, now in slippers, curls pinned, eyes rimmed in kohl. They sit beside their partner and lace fingers together like they've done it 1,000 times. No one speaks. They don't need to, because in a world that refused to give them names for what they were, they made their own. In every letter, every shared garment, every smuggled touch at the edge of a crowded room. You glance at the piano, where a sheet of music rests. The title reads, Nocturne for the Unseen. That's what all of this is, in the end. A lullaby for the quiet ones. The ones who loved sideways, who loved in shadow, who dared to kiss without history's permission. And as the fire crackles, you realize you're witnessing not a deviation, but a defiance. A soft, relentless refusal to be erased. Because even behind lace curtains and closed doors, love lived. And it looked however it needed to. You find yourself walking through a long hallway lit by flickering sconces, their flame shadows dancing against wallpaper printed with pale roses and goldly filigree. The silence here is heavier, more still. And as you reach the end of the corridor, a door opens quietly, almost reluctantly. Inside, the temperature drops. The room is pristine, but not warm. Everything is arranged with perfect symmetry, matching chairs, symmetrical drapes, 2 identical pillows at the head of the bed. And yet, the distance between them is a chasm. This is a married couple's bedroom, and you can feel it before you see it, the absence of love, or maybe the slow erosion of it. The woman stands near the window, her posture upright, her face unreadable. She's dressed in pale silk, her hair pinned so tightly it barely moves when she turns. The man is seated in a leather chair, smoking in silence, flipping through the newspaper with the same interest he might give a menu. They are married, but not close. You move around the room and catch the signs. 2 separate books on the nightstand, 2 clocks, 2 scents of perfume, 2 mirrors that never quite reflect one another. Victorian marriages, especially among the upper class, were often more arrangement than romance. A dance of duty, estate consolidation, and bloodlines. Love, if it arrived, was an accident, an inconvenience, or worse, a memory. Historians still argue whether Victorian couples were truly more repressed or simply better at hiding their disappointments. But the surviving diaries and letters tell enough. You sit in the corner and find a small journal tucked behind the sewing basket. The handwriting is sharp, spidery, and difficult to read. The first line, "He kissed me on the forehead again, as if I were dying." Another page, "He still calls me darling. I don't think he remembers why." And another, Sometimes I pretend to be asleep when he enters the room, not because I'm afraid, just because I'm tired of trying. A fringe detail? In some households, separate bedrooms weren't uncommon, especially among the wealthy. It was more dignified, more respectable. In reality, it was often just easier. You peek inside the dressing room. Her vanity is immaculate, her rouge untouched. She stopped wearing color. Her letters, hidden behind a book of sermons, are addressed to no one. They are not sent. The ones she does send? To her mother, her cousin, sometimes a sister, always full of polite nothingness. You glance toward the desk, where a note has been left open, unsigned, but clearly his. Thursday dinner. Lord Halverton will attend. Please wear the gray. The blue makes you look sallow. You feel that more than you should. In the wardrobe, a corset hangs from a hook, worn but still stiff. At its hem, a small thread has unraveled. She's sewn it back, over and over, and in that thread lives a truth. Even the fabric of her own shape is expected to perform. Downstairs, someone laughs. Not here, not in this room. Here, there is only quiet, a kind that creaks between breaths. She finally moves, walks to the writing desk, opens a drawer. You watch as she removes a tiny bottle, clear glass, half filled with pale pink liquid. Not poison. Not yet. You lean in. The label is handwritten. Forget me tea. It's not real tea, of course. It's valerian, rose hips, crushed poppy seed, and something bitter, something numbing. A homebrewed blend meant not to soothe pain, but to smooth the edges of awareness. She unscrews the cap, lingers, then puts it back, because tonight she must smile. Tonight they dine with the Halvertons, and her job is to be admired, composed, silent. The tragedy, neither of them is cruel. He thanks her when she pours his wine. She smooths his collar. He nods at her dress. They kiss each other goodnight. On the cheek. They are not enemies. Just strangers living in a house filled with folded linens and unspoken fatigue. You find a half-finished embroidery piece on her bedside table. It's a rose, stitched carefully, almost obsessively. At its center, where the petals should be softest, she's pricked the fabric so many times it's fraying. Splitting, a flower made of little wounds. She's stitched the same one 10 times, not for a gift, just to keep her hands moving. One mainstream fact: Victorian women were expected to manage a home's appearance as a reflection of their husband's status. A well-kept drawing room, a spotless nursery, the proper scent of soup. These were all measures of her success, not his. And love. Love was optional. It helped, yes, but like heat in a room, it wasn't always on. You just learned to live with the chill. You glance at the mirror above the hearth. It reflects the room perfectly. Every object in place, not a hair out of order, and not a single thing that speaks of joy. As you rise to leave, you hear a knock on the bedroom door. She straightens, smooths her skirt, puts on her smile like a mask just taken from its velvet case. "Yes?" she says, his voice on the other side. "They've arrived." She nods, even though he cannot see. "I'm coming." And then she leaves the room, just like that. You remain behind, watching the curtains stir in her absence. The bed remains perfectly made, the perfume untouched. The embroidery sits, waiting for another petal. And the little bottle of forget-me tea, still unopened, but maybe not for long. Umber. You step down into a chamber that doesn't belong in this house, or any house really. It's dim, warm and heavy with sandalwood and patchouli. The gas lamps are turned low, the curtains drawn tight. At first glance, it might be a library or a gentleman's lounge. But then you see the table in the center. Mahogany, circular, set for 5. with an ornate crystal ball in the middle and silver cards arranged like flower petals. This is a seance room, and it's very much in use. Welcome to the bedroom of the elite, where the flickering candlelight meets mysticism, and where romance takes a curious detour through the paranormal. You sit quietly as a woman in a dark green gown takes her place at the head of the table. She's wearing rings on every finger, some with onyx, others with smoky quartz. Her voice is low, almost sleepy. "He speaks to me," she whispers. "The one you lost. He knows you still wear his scent." A gasp. A woman in black dabs at her eyes. The medium turns toward her. "He says you're not alone in your bed, but he forgives you." You blink. Victorian spiritualism was as fashionable as velvet gloves and cravat pins. And among the upper classes, seances weren't just entertainment. They were intimate. Erotic, even. A place to say what you couldn't say at dinner. A place to touch hands in darkness, to speak to the dead, and, conveniently, the forbidden living. You walk past the velvet divan and find a booklet of seance instructions. It reads, "Begin with soft breath, lower the lights. Let all voices speak through you." Then, curiously, "Do not resist the touch of the Spirit. Let him guide your hands." Historians still debate whether spiritualists were true believers or clever performers, but many women found unexpected freedom in the practice. The Spirit could say what they dared not, could ask for what they'd been trained to deny. You find a letter folded under a candle holder, a widow's handwriting, flowing and ink dark. "He touched my wrist again tonight. I told myself it was the ghost, but I saw his face when the candle flickered." You glance at the table again. The guests are holding hands now. Eyes closed. The medium is humming. A man in the circle leans slightly toward the woman next to him. Her eyes flutter but don't open. In this space, rules soften. Touches are excused. Every sigh could be possession. Every whispered desire, just something from the other side. Fringe fact: in the 1870s, some seances encouraged magnetic beds, elaborate couches that supposedly conducted spiritual energy. Participants were asked to lie down, relax completely, and open their minds. The sessions were long and full of opportunity. You step into the adjacent room where one of these magnetic beds remains. It looks innocent enough. Velvet pillows, a lace blanket, a small side table with a bottle of tonic labeled "For clarity of vision and gentle surrender." It smells like rosewater and fennel. You suspect it does more than clear vision. The woman who runs this house, Madame Rosetta, judging by the monogrammed hand fan, keeps detailed records. You find one now, half buried in a drawer. Mr. H, troubled by the memory of his late wife, visited 4 times. Last visit ended in tremors. Declared himself cured. Requested private session. Lady T believes the spirit of a former lover speaks through the curtains. Cries often, tips generously. Miss B, unmarried, returns weekly. Asks for same partner each time. Says he reminds her of her dreams. These are not spiritual ailments. These are emotional ones. Bodily ones. Love, longing, loneliness. All given ghostly names to make them manageable. You notice the small bell on the table. Polished brass, still faintly warm from touch. A symbol of surrender. Ring it, and the medium will come. Ring it twice, and someone else will. You lean against the window pane and peer into the dark garden beyond. A couple stands under the pergola. They are not holding hands, but their shoulders lean toward each other like flowers toward sunlight. The man gestures to the sky. "It's just fog," she says softly. He replies, or maybe it's him, still watching. You can't tell if they're pretending, or if they truly believe. Maybe it doesn't matter. because belief in these circles wasn't about truth. It was about permission. And in seance parlors like this one, permission was currency. To feel, to flirt, to ache, and sometimes to touch. You return to the seance room. It's nearly silent now. The candles burn low. One man wipes a tear from his cheek. A woman clasps her hands over her chest. The medium speaks once more. He says, he never left. He just forgot how to be near. No one moves. And in that hush, 100 unsaid things hover, like breath on a mirror. Visible for a second, then gone. The rain has stopped now, and you walk through the dewy garden path behind the house. Ivy clings to stone. The air smells like crushed lavender, and somewhere a nightingale sings like it's still grieving. You follow a narrow path toward a set of wrought iron gates. Beyond them, a low building with arched windows and gas lamps glowing like tired eyes. You know where you are, the asylum, but not the thunderstorm, padded wall kind. This is the soft floral-scented version, where women are wrested into submission and re-educated out of their discontent. Where love becomes a diagnosis and desire, especially if unreturned or unconventional, is considered a disease. You step into the foyer, your boots echoing across tile. There's a floral arrangement on the reception desk. Beneath it, a ledger. The last few names are all women. Ages 19 to 36, admitted for emotional excess, unmanageable impulses, or the most damning phrase of all, erotic melancholy. You walk slowly down the corridor. Behind the frosted glass doors, you see silhouettes. One paces, one sits curled in a chair, another stands perfectly still, staring at her own reflection, as if willing it to blink. Love here is not a gift. It's a condition, a problem to be treated. Victorian physicians had no shortage of ways to describe it. Nymphomania, hysteria, uterine fury, melancholia, erotica. Any woman who longed too deeply, touched too often, or simply asked too many questions could find herself here. With a diagnosis and a treatment plan that included everything from cold baths to isolation to the forced removal of stimulating literature. You enter a softly lit treatment room where a nurse in gray linen prepares a tray, not for surgery, for sedation. Laudanum, valerian, sometimes chloral hydrate, a cocktail to quiet the spirit, or erase it entirely. One bed is occupied. A woman lies still beneath a lace coverlet, hands folded like a doll's. Her journal is open on the table beside her. You glance inside. He told me I was too much. I agreed. Now I feel nothing. Another page. They say the fire in me is gone. They never asked who lit it. Historians still argue whether most asylum admissions were medical or moral. Truth is, the line blurred like steam on a window. Some women were admitted by husbands who'd grown tired, by fathers who didn't like their daughters' lovers, by society itself whispering, she feels too loudly. A fringe detail. Some institutions offered hydrotherapy for romantic obsession. Women were strapped to benches beneath cold water streams for hours to cool the blood. Many came out silent, not healed, just quiet. You step into the library, a small locked room with censored books. Only the most pious volumes remain, but one has been hidden behind Pilgrim's Progress. A slim romance novel with torn edges and frantic underlines. One sentence is circled again and again. She touched his cheek, and in that moment, she became herself. A woman behind you murmurs, "That's the line that got me here." You turn, startled. She's wearing a nightdress, her hair loose, her smile thin and sharp. She picks up a cup of chamomile tea and sips. They told me I loved too fast, too many, too wrong. You sit beside her. She keeps talking. There was a man. then a woman, then no one. I wrote letters. I danced alone. They called it unsettled behavior. I called it breathing. You ask her name. She gives you one. You don't know if it's hers. Before you leave, she slips you a folded paper. Later, you'll read it by candlelight. It says, "There's no cure for longing, just quieter rooms." You move down the hall, past the closed doors. Each one contains a version of the same story. A woman who wanted too much, or not enough, or just differently. A woman who cried too long over a letter, or kissed the wrong mouth, or said no when she was meant to nod. A woman whose grief was labeled delusion, whose love was renamed fever. The beds are tidy, the curtains drawn. No one screams here. It's not that kind of asylum. The harm here is quieter. You reach the final room, a small chapel. Candles burn beside a painting of Mary Magdalene, her eyes lifted toward a heaven that never quite answers. A Bible lies open on a stand. Someone's penciled in the margins. What if we're not sick? What if we're just unheard? You sit, you breathe, you listen, and for a moment, the silence says everything. The path from the asylum winds into a cemetery, as soft and muted as a sigh. The mist is rising now, curling low across the stones, brushing cold fingers along your skin. Iron gates creak behind you as you enter. No fanfare, no grand monuments, just weathered stone, faded names, and small offerings left by those who remember. And yet even here, especially here, love lingers. You pass a headstone marked only with initials and a date. M.E. 874. A single pansy rests at its base. Someone was thinking of her. Maybe still is. Victorians believed in mourning the way modern people believe in therapy. Thoroughly, ritualistically, with layers of symbolism. Death wasn't the end of love. It was simply a transition. And if you were lucky, you might hold on to something of the beloved. A lock of hair, a ring, a locket with ashes, a fingernail even. You shudder, but you also understand. Because when love ended in illness, accident, war, childbirth, or slow decline, mourning wasn't a weakness. It was devotion, made visible, made wearable. You step into a mausoleum. Inside, it smells like roses, dust, and secrets that never needed to be whispered. On a marble shelf rests a brooch made of braided hair. Brown, finely woven, preserved in a loop beneath glass. Below it, a plaque. My beloved Henry, may your hand still rest in mine. Historians still debate whether mourning jewelry was romantic remembrance or just macabre fashion. But one thing is certain, these tokens weren't for show. They were anchors. Objects to prove that the bond had existed, that it still existed. Beyond the veil, beyond the breath. You move slowly through the graves and find another token. A ring wrapped in black ribbon. Mourning rings were often given out at funerals, passed from hand to hand like sacred relics. Some contained hair, others inscriptions. One popular style read simply, "In memory." You trace a headstone with your glove and notice a small leather journal tucked into the base. Inside are poems, love poems, handwritten in black ink, careful and tender. One reads, "You left me only silence, but I stitched your name into the lining of my glove, so I carry you into every room I enter." Another, "They say I will love again, but none of them knew the shape of your breath." You close it slowly. Someone left this here on purpose. A fringe fact? There were those who believed in post-mortem connection, not just spiritualism, but practical contact. Letters were written to the dead and buried with them. One woman sent a note with her deceased fiancé's corpse asking, "Will you find me when it's time?" It was discovered years later, folded into the lining of his vest. You pass a mausoleum door etched with an epitaph. Love made us fools. Death made us honest. Poetic, brutal, true. And nearby, under a yew tree, rests a solitary statue. A woman in profile, her hand outstretched, holding nothing. No ring, no letter, just the pose of reaching. It's unclear whether she's waiting for someone to take her hand, or if she's offering it one last time. You sit on the bench nearby. The cold seeps through the stone. You imagine someone coming here every Sunday, dressed in gray with violets tucked into their sleeve. Not to mourn, to remember. Because love for the Victorians wasn't just something to chase in life. It was something to preserve after death. In letters, in objects, in rituals repeated long after anyone else thought it necessary. There are graves here with fresh flowers, others with melted wax, little notes, tarnished buttons, a pressed daisy wrapped in linen. None of this is new. It's simply what people do when words fail. They leave behind traces. And as you rise, your eye catches one last inscription, nearly covered by moss. If you see her, tell her I'm still waiting. The bench is cold, but I remain. You press your palm gently to the stone. And then you walk. Not quickly. Not loudly, because the cemetery in its silence has given you something unexpected. Not sadness, but continuity. A reminder that love may begin with flirtation, rise in madness, burn in obsession, fade in resentment, twist in secrets, break in betrayal, but it ends in memory. And memory is the gentlest potion of all. The air is cooler now, softer. Each breath comes slower, deeper. The candle flickers low, the pages of history curling inward like petals closing at night. You're no longer walking, just floating. Not through rooms, but through recollections. Through sighs. Let it all quiet. Let the rustle of skirts fade, the clink of bottles, the whispers of secret spells. Let the courtroom fall silent. Let the apothecary shutter its windows. Let the lace gloves slip off gently, forgotten on the edge of a satin settee. You've wandered through a world of longing, of masks and mirrors and murky potions, of promises made in moonlight and regrets sealed in letters never sent. You've watched love become an ailment, a costume, a weapon, a memory, and now you're on the other side of it. The rain has stopped. The mist has lifted. You're safe, still. The stories have folded themselves up and laid down beside you like a cat in the corner of the room. You don't need to hold on to them anymore. Just drift. Breathe in, slow and warm. Breathe out, long and quiet. The past will be here when you wake. But for now, let the ghosts rest. Let the potions cool. Let your thoughts dissolve like sugar in tea. You've survived the night, the history, the heartbreak, and what remains now is peace.